The night air was thick with tension, headlights flickering across a lonely New Orleans curb as Debbie's trembling hands gripped the steering wheel. Her voice cracked, raw from shouting, as she demanded Mido get out of her car. He stared back, stunned, too proud or too lost to offer a word. This wasn't some petty squabble. This was a war zone in miniature, right there on the street. Only hours earlier, they were playing the part of a couple about to start a new life, but here they were, tears, rage, TV cameras forgotten, the wreckage of something that once looked like love scattered in the darkness. Just months before, these two had been the improbable hope of fans who thought, maybe, this odd pair might actually beat the odds. But after this eruption, you just sit there, wondering, did anyone really see the disaster coming? Was this all doomed from the first I love you sent across Facebook, or did Mido and Debbie ever actually stand a chance? What kind of relationship turns so toxic so fast that you find yourself screaming at the person you brought across the world to share your bed, telling them to walk out under the harsh glare of streetlights? As Mido finally slammed the door behind him, you almost feel bad for both, yet you can't help asking yourself, was this relationship ever about love? Or has it always been just a high-stakes hustle, a Hollywood audition written in heartbreak? Let's rewind. Debbie, determined and open-hearted, believed her late-in-life adventure was the real thing. She was ready to welcome Mido from Cairo right into her New Orleans life. The man told her he'd leave everything behind to be with her. But what's the price of admission to the American dream, and how much heartbreak can one woman fit into 90 days? You could see the doubts flicker across her face every time Mido shifted the conversation away from real life and back to acting reels, glowing LA lights, and his next shot at fame. Did she fall for a partner, or did she sign up to be free labor for someone else's career? And honestly, when you look at how fast those smiles dissolved into insults, who's left holding the truth? Now picture the moment. The car stops, the voices boil over, and the man who flew halfway around the world because he claimed to love her is back out on the street, miles from Hollywood, nowhere near happy endings. Debbie is left gasping for air, mascara running, realizing her future might already be lost before it ever even started. How do people get here, from dreamy airport reunions to ugly showdowns nobody can take back? Was it the pressure of the visa clock ticking, or was it the quiet realization that they never actually spoke the same emotional language? Either way, this is the kind of scene fans replay 1,000 times, searching for the exact second it all started falling apart. But here's the wildest part. It felt both shocking and inevitable, like everyone saw it coming except the two in the car. So you sit at home, still asking, did Debbie lose herself in someone else's dream? Or did Mido lose the plot in his mad dash for the spotlight? And what happens after someone gets left on the side of the road, with nothing but the weight of every regret and a camera crew watching it all? One thing's clear, the real drama doesn't stop here. It's only beginning. 6 years ago, Debbie thought she'd found her big plot twist. Picture this, a seasoned New Orleans insurance agent with a grown family, grandkids, and a fierce longing for something new, landing in Egypt with her daughter. The heat, the noise, the sheer overwhelm of Cairo, you can almost smell the dust in the air. Then there's Mido, guiding her through ancient ruins, serving up his charm like mint tea. He was different. Or at least, that's what she believed. Mido spun tales of the big life, talked of movies and fame, hinting that he'd trade pyramids for palm trees if only he had the chance. To anyone watching, it probably sounded more like Netflix than real life. Still, she soaked up the attention. You get it, after years of routine, who wouldn't want to feel intriguing again? Sometimes, attention is more addictive than any love story. Debbie heads back home, trading Egyptian sunsets for Louisiana humidity, but Mido keeps showing up in her notifications. At first, it's sweet video calls and romantic good mornings. He plays the lover from afar, promising more than just wedding vows. He says he's bringing passion, ambition, all those things missing from her practical, middle-aged life. Her kids shake their heads, her friends call it a fantasy, but Debbie holds tight. He says he's willing to leave everything, career, family, country, just for a shot with her. On TV, these stories always look shiny, but anyone who's dated online knows there's always some detail that doesn't add up. Who hasn't been tempted to believe the best, even when the plot holes keep piling up? So here comes the big leap. Debbie pushes for the K-1 visa, ready to risk her reputation for the guy who made her feel alive again. 90 days to decide if forever is real or if heartbreak is stamped in the fine print. Her neighbors whisper, her adult kids quietly panic. The show puts their smiles front and center, but you sense everyone around her is waiting for the fireworks. No one ever talks about how disorienting real romance can be, especially when visas, language gaps, age, and ambition get involved. Still, the fantasy looks solid from the outside. New Orleans awaits, full of bumpy promise. Then reality lands. Mido arrives in America like he's walking onto a studio set, barely settled before launching straight into plans for Hollywood. He drops LA as often as people say bless you in New Orleans. Debbie hopes for cozy date nights at local spots, but Mido wants to network, chase auditions, and call agents he claims to know. Every dinner comes with a side order of Instagram strategy. Did she bring home a partner, or did she import a one-man publicity campaign? It's the classic setup, the couple on different wavelengths, pretending they're in the same movie. You know the feeling when you think you've landed a rare find, only to spot the flaws you were ignoring once you really look? That's Debbie. The man who once seemed so attentive is now impatient, dismissive, always itching to turn their small-town life into something flashier. She finds herself footing bills, keeping up with his ever-shifting moods, and watching her own excitement wane as Mido stays glued to his phone. Still, she keeps hoping things will settle. Isn't that what everyone does when their heart's on the line? But then, tiny cracks start to show. Maybe it's the way he checks out of conversations with her friends. Maybe it's how he drags his feet about basic things, like helping with chores or even saying thank you. Debbie starts to realize even the grandest of gestures from Mido hides a gnawing impatience. Something feels off, lurking beneath each forced smile. The fantasy is fading, but nobody's ready to call it quits just yet. The first real fracture is coming, and trust me, it's about to flip their whole story upside down. Would you trust a person who keeps changing their script every time the spotlight shifts? The mask is slipping, and soon, everyone will see what's been hiding in plain sight. It started small. A bit of eye-rolling from Mido when Debbie's friends asked about his life in Egypt. A half-hearted sure when she floated the idea of a quiet dinner together. He seemed bored stiff by her stories, even though these were the same slice-of-life details she'd eagerly shared with him over video calls for months. This wasn't the dreamy-eyed guy who had promised her a wild adventure halfway across the world. Now, in her living room, he looked more like a guest who checked in by mistake, stealing himself until room service arrived. Sweet nothings became sour everythings. You could almost laugh if it didn't sting so much. Here was love's promise, now suddenly missing half its script. Everything hit a higher note the day Debbie decided to introduce Mido to her inner circle. You expect a bit of awkwardness. After all, who hasn't wanted a new partner to pass the friend test? But for Debbie, this was the ultimate stress test. Friends she'd known for decades wanted to finally meet the man who toppled her whole routine. She daydreamed about the perfect evening, maybe sharing a few laughs, clinking glasses, a chance for Mido to show his softer side. He walked in with all the enthusiasm of a man auditioning for a part he didn't want. Eyes darting, voice flat, every answer short and half-baked. Instead of charm, he dialed up detachment, leaving her friends whispering behind napkins and Debbie's stomach in her shoes. People started suspecting, which only made the whole mess more prickly. Was it nerves? Culture shock? Or was this the real Mido? Some gave him the benefit of the doubt, figuring maybe a language barrier or jet lag explained the chilly vibes. Others caught those dismissive looks, the way he checked out of the conversation, scrolling through his phone instead of engaging. At least once, he smirked as if he was above it all. Debbie could feel her old confidence dissolving, the dream of blending two lives already on life support. The plot thickened at Halloween. Debbie planned a bash, thinking costumes and candy could smooth over what dinner and drinks hadn't. Mido, true to unpredictable form, arrived dressed like an Egyptian pharaoh, a touch she might have embraced if he hadn't used it as a shield to ignore everyone. The mask said fun, but his attitude screamed, "Get me out of here." He kept to himself, refused to join conversations, and barely registered when Debbie's friends tried to pull him in. The room chilled, and Debbie felt more alone than ever, surrounded by people yet isolated by the crack in her new relationship. She wanted the night to go right. Instead, it felt like everyone had gotten the memo except her. It turned ugly on the car ride home. Fatigue turned to frustration, then exploded. Debbie, exhausted and wounded, called out Mido's disrespect. His voice shot back, defensive and loud, turning apology into accusation. It was a shouting match that left both of them ragged, filmed by the glare of the moon and the reality TV crew, who never seemed to flinch. For a moment, it looked as if everything might tip off the rails, friends nearby, producers scrambling. Public drama, private agony. After, something shifted. Debbie stared at the ceiling that night, replaying every awkward silence, every time Mido brushed her aside. Mido, on his end, started laying the groundwork for sidestepping any blame, pointing the finger at Debbie's friends for being unwelcoming, or at Debbie for not supporting his dream. But everyone watching could see what was really happening. The ambition that might have been sweet back in Cairo had hijacked every conversation. Was it the plan all along, or did American soil flip some switch inside him? Every week, his sights stood fixed on California, not commitment. The friends talked. Online, strangers debated who was playing whom. It felt like the viewers became detectives, zooming in on body language, rewinding glances, throwing down theories about who stood to gain the most from this wild American journey. Some said he was a product of mismatched dreams. Others saw red flags from the first moment. Debbie, once convinced she'd found her forever, now looked at Mido and saw someone she barely recognized. Was this drift between them a patch they'd recover from, or were they already in free fall with only heartbreak at the bottom? Everything feels unstable now, like any move could send the whole relationship crashing down. And no one, not even Debbie, knows if there's one more twist waiting around the corner, or if the ending has already been written by the choices they made long before the cameras started rolling. Who decides when a crack is too deep to patch over? The next chapter could change everything, for better or for drama. The moment that fight aired, the internet couldn't look away. Twitter exploded. Reddit became an unofficial 24-hour CSI New Orleans as thousands tried to figure out who was lying, who was performing, and who would finally pull the ripcord on this messy experiment. Some people couldn't hit rewind fast enough on the scene with Debbie screaming for Mido to get out. 1 second, you see heartbreak. The next, pure exhaustion and the sting of betrayal. Viewers split fast. Every comment section was a war zone. Team Debbie ready to burn it all down in her defense, and a handful of stubborn Mido supporters still clutching their theories that maybe, just maybe, he'd been misunderstood. Team Debbie said she deserved better, that she'd wasted her golden years on a man who couldn't even look her friends in the eye. They cited every on-air slight, each time Mido dodged a question or blinked in the middle of dinner. People called it manipulation. More than a few wrote up checklists of red flags they believed were obvious from the jump, as if they'd all become amateur relationship referees. There was a sense of public catharsis any time Debbie took a stand, even when her voice shook, because as much as America loves a good love story, nobody cheers for a woman getting steamrolled in her own house. And every time she posted something about courage or new beginnings, fans jumped in with their own scars and solidarity. It was like a communal breakup. But while Debbie's DMs filled with digital hugs and "you go girl" support, scattered diehards in Mido's corner refused to call it. Some blamed TLC's editing or said cultural differences made him look colder than he was. A few picked apart the timeline, swearing up and down that Mido had real affection buried somewhere beneath the bravado and missed cues. It was an uphill climb. Every week brought another round of evidence, Mido deleting old couple pics, adding moody black and white headshots, switching up his captions to focus on grind and the future. No more sappy posts. No fingers linked together. No found my soulmate vibes. If you watched his grid, you could see the breakup long before it was officially announced. And Debbie, for her part, switched to cryptic quotes about setting boundaries, rediscovering self-worth, and refusing to let anyone belittle her sacrifices. If you search the 90-Day Fiancé hashtag, you were bound to see her posts screenshotted out of context and studied for hidden meaning. When she unfollowed Mido, people gasped. The fandom was living for every digital breadcrumb. Every delete, every new follower, every accidental like turned into proof, another twist in the story. Friends and strangers speculated on everything from green card intentions to who'd keep the pets. Some found themselves sucked into long threads guessing how the producers felt, or if anyone at TLC tried to steer Debbie clear before things got ugly. A lot of it felt like rubbernecking a car crash, but there's something brutally honest about the way people responded, half gossip, half genuine heartbreak for everyone who's ever been ghosted with the world watching. The loudest argument was always about what was real. Did Debbie ignore the obvious because she wanted love so badly? Was Mido truly cold, or did he lose himself in the chaos and camera lights? And through it all, there was this constant underlying suspicion that maybe both had become trapped in a show, kept afloat by drama, unable to step outside and say, enough. Even their apologies started looking rehearsed by the end, every on-screen hug feeling more like a curtain call than real reconciliation. And then came the confirmation no one could pretend didn't hurt. Social media detectives called it first, but the split became fact soon after. Debbie and Mido were done. No more tagged photos, no more joint interviews, just radio silence and a wave of "it's about time" from most of the comment sections. A tiny slice of the fandom held out hope for closure, but for everyone else, the story became about what's left behind after the credits roll, and the next episode, trailer teases someone else's brand of chaos. The fans pressed refresh, scanning for the next sign of life, but you could feel the shift. The love story had become a cautionary tale, and the fandom was ready for fallout. Right now, everyone's waiting for the next big reveal, because every time you think the dust has settled, real life finds a way to stir it all up again. The dust never really settles after a breakup like this, not when millions have watched your heart set on fire in prime time. The story didn't end on that curb. Debbie's world shrank to a few quiet rooms in New Orleans, the echoes of Mido's voice bouncing through the silence left behind. It's strange how quickly romance can fade into routine, then spiral into chaos. She woke up every morning with the same thought: how did things go so wrong so fast? If you've ever clung to a failing relationship, you know the way hope and denial work together, always offering one more excuse. For Debbie, that meant rerunning old messages, rereading apologies, and remembering the man on the other end of the world who once called her his one true shot at happiness. Those first days, she found herself walking old routes, replaying their earliest calls in her head. She wondered if any of it was real, or if it was all just another entry on Mido's resume. Sure, he talked about love, but love had always shared the front seat with his acting career, his Instagram, and the promise of something bigger just out of reach. The split made her question where she'd missed the signs. Maybe she'd been too eager to see the best in him, or maybe anyone can get lost in someone else's spotlight if the glare is bright enough. Memory can be more addictive than reality, especially after so much has unraveled in public. Even the smallest things, the sound of a message alert, the smell of his cologne, felt like little haunted reminders of dreams she built alone. But heartbreak, for all its sting, creates room for clarity. Once the social media haze faded, once the last message was deleted and the blocked list grew one name longer, Debbie started to see herself again. No more pleasing, no more living by someone else's script. Her support system closed ranks, friends rallying around her with stories of their own near misses, reminding her she wasn't the first or the last to put hope on the wrong horse. There's a power in collective healing, the way scars become warnings for the next generation. In private moments, Debbie realized every "I love you" left unreturned had led her closer to this line in the sand. Letting go didn't mean erasing the dream, only choosing her own peace over borrowed chaos. Of course, letting go after so much investment never comes easy. For every rational decision, there's an emotional echo asking, what if? Debbie watched her own posts fill up with empathetic strangers who told her they'd been there, who admitted they hung on too long hoping for a change that never came. The cycle is ancient. Love, hope, betrayal, bargaining, surrender. Each time you forgive, you think you're doing it for the other person. Eventually, you realize forgiveness is the only way out for yourself. That's the psychology that keeps so many stuck, locked in the drama far beyond the kiss-off scene. Debbie's moment of awakening was both private and public. Nothing like getting your heartbreak roasted on 3 continents to show you the cost of emotional inertia. The old promises started to sound cheap in hindsight. Mido had sworn they were equals, that dreams would be shared, sacrifices mutual. But look close, and the trade-off was always unequal. She was picking up the bills, holding down their American life, willing to cram her world around his ambitions. Yet every time the subject turned practical, work, blending families, staying put, Mido punted. Always another audition, always the next call, the big break in LA that never seemed to materialize but always kept him busy chasing. Debbie replayed the fights, the dinners cut short, the nights Mido spent gazing at California zip codes on his phone. Each time he refused to step into her reality, he was already halfway out the door. Still, it wasn't a clean loss. Debbie walked away with scars, but also with reclaimed dignity. She found small victories in the aftermath, sleeping in her own bed without tiptoeing around someone else's schedule, laughing with friends who'd been sidelined for months, even binge-watching her own guilty pleasure TV, without commentary from the self-proclaimed celebrity. Sometimes closure is nothing more glamorous than breathing easy again. It took a season's worth of chaos, but she discovered honesty in the ruins, relief blooming each time she remembered she was no longer waiting for an apology that would never come. Meanwhile, Mido spun his own version of events online. To his followers, he kept up the appearance of a man undeterred, pivoting straight into hustle mode. New headshots, hashtags about new beginnings, and a feed that looked more like a portfolio than a heartbreak diary. But even his supporters could sense the struggle. Without Debbie's backing, without the legal safety net of marriage, the American dream became far more complicated. No visa extension meant no guaranteed Hollywood fantasy. The same drive that brought him across the world now left him untethered, forced to figure out if stardom still beckoned without the storyline TLC once gave him. Fans kept one eye peeled for signs of a comeback. Some wondered if he'd land a small part in local theater. Others speculated he'd return to Egypt with nothing but bruised pride and a suitcase of regrets. The tension between authenticity and ambition never went away. Mido's energy shifted, his posts turning defensive or oddly philosophical. If you looked closely, you sensed a man running out of runway. Every new follower a reminder that fame can be fleeting, especially when it's built on shaky ground. The grandest dreams, it turns out, are the hardest to pin down. For both, the future remains a question mark. Debbie, once painted as desperate, now emerged as someone who could spot daylight between the lines of a lie. Her life, no longer staged for drama, went back to its lopsided comfort. Mido faced a much harder landing. The world got to watch their courtship unravel in real time, but the aftermath is far more solitary. America's obsession with second chances kept viewers invested, always asking what's next. Will Debbie find happiness closer to home, or does Mido's story somehow cycle back for another act? Whatever comes next, one thing is certain. Heartbreak is messy, recovery is slow, and for a few weeks on TV, millions wondered how they'd survive it if the camera ever turned on their own lives. But as the dust finally began to clear in New Orleans and Los Angeles faded to a blip in the distance, both are quietly building something different, a new chapter with fewer illusions and maybe, just maybe, a chance to get real about what they want and what they're worth. But with every dramatic split comes a fresh round of questions. Will healing really stick, or is one of them secretly plotting a third-act comeback? As fans rewind the saga, guessing at half-truths and plotting Twitter threads, nobody knows for sure if this is the final curtain or the pause before another storm. Sometimes, the best stories don't end with answers, but with the feeling that something unfinished is always just around the next corner. There's a chill in the night air, even long after the shouting stops, and the eerie quiet is almost more noticeable than the arguments. That silence, that's what usually follows a public goodbye. Debbie sits at her kitchen table, staring out at streetlights she used to think looked romantic, the ghosts of all those late-night texts and calls now flickering somewhere between nostalgia and hard-earned wisdom. She's not the first person to fall for the dream. Someone far away, a promise of bigger adventures, a Hollywood story delivered via sponsored plane ticket and camera crew. But underneath all the edits and confessions, the biggest surprise wasn't in how Mido let go, but in how quickly Debbie learned she could. 2. Something breaks in you when a relationship falls apart in front of millions, when every vulnerable moment is frozen, rewound, and argued over by total strangers. The heartbreak isn't private, but it's honest. People think the pain comes from being left, but for Debbie, the real sting was realizing how many pieces of herself she gave up, one compromise at a time, to keep someone else's story moving forward. For Mido, heartbreak looked less like mourning and more like recalibrating, recalculating his chances, as if opportunity has a reset button if you hit record enough times. It's almost easier to blame the cameras, to pretend that the story only twisted because it was produced for TV, but the truth lives in the quiet moments, those empty mornings, the hollow clink of a coffee mug, the way small talk with a friend suddenly brings a wave of relief instead of fear. Sometimes, grief isn't a tidal wave. Sometimes it's a subtle current, pulling you under every time you scroll past an old photo, every time you catch your reflection, and realize you don't recognize the person who let this happen. Debbie must have run through the highlight reels 1,000 times, checking for where the fairy tale veered into farce. Maybe it was the way Mido shrugged off her friends, the self-involvement crackling just beneath his big dreamer persona, or the night he stood on the pavement, unwilling or unable to say he was sorry. The hardest pill to swallow is that it's not always someone else's fault. Sometimes you just want the promise of romance so badly that you let hope talk over the voices screaming, "Run," in your own head. She could have clung harder, but the final break came like tearing off a stubborn bandage. Screaming in the car, the public mess, the camera crew cutting into personal space. All that was real, but so was the strength in finally stopping the cycle. Debbie picked herself up, hugged her grandkids, let her friends pour her another glass of wine. The world didn't stop turning. If anything, it sped up. Did she get closure? Maybe not. Maybe that's the myth that keeps heartbreak interesting, this idea that if you play your part right, pay your dues in late-night tears and long emails, someday it'll all make sense. That's not how life works. Sometimes you just survive, and that's enough for today. As for Mido, an unexpected quiet followed his exit. No dramatic farewells, no staged confessionals about real love. He pivoted straight into new ambition, the grind, the next edition, the steady parade of curated Instagram shots. You see it over and over. People try to outrun disappointment by staying busy, pretending the void isn't yawning wider with every day spent chasing attention. The American dream isn't always so welcoming when it's built on half promises. Friends faded. Hype cooled. Now there are fewer likes, less validation, and the cold realization that fame needs more than a platform. It needs supporters, it needs substance, it needs something nobody can fake with a catchy hashtag. But here's the payback nobody expected. All along, Debbie's story was painted as the cautionary tale, the warning against falling for the fantasy. Yet the backlash gave her a strange freedom. She spoke to her pain, found empathy from places she never imagined, and returned to her life with fewer illusions, but more control. Her kids stopped waiting for her to break. Instead, they learned how resilient she is. Her friends included her in things again, not out of pity, but relief. There's something electric about realizing the people who stuck around wanted her, not the drama. She started inviting herself back into her own story. The leading role this time, no pay-to-play romantic leads attached. It doesn't mean anger never visits. Some days are shot through with resentment, at wasted time, at lost money, at her own blind spots. It's easier to get mad about old dinners she paid for than to face how much faith she invested in someone who'd rather look good on camera than look her in the eye. But she doesn't live there anymore. The relief comes in waves. Every time a friend calls or another fan message lands in her inbox, every time someone tells her they saw themselves in her story, she grows lighter. Her heartbreak wasn't wasted. It turned into warning signs for someone else to watch for. It became a reminder that you can lose the plot, but still walk off your own set. People think reality TV is about the drama, but it's about the reset. Watching Debbie piece herself back together, you start to wonder how many of us have lived the same arc, minus the camera crew. Who hasn't tried to salvage a relationship because they're too scared to face another version of themselves, single, uncertain, finally calling the bluff on a partner's big talk? How many Midos are out there still chasing the next big role, their own Twitter armies ready to defend every mistake? Sometimes it's not about villains. Sometimes it's about not being ready to walk away, even when staying means shrinking. And still, not every loop closes on cue. Debbie's path isn't straight, and neither is Mido's. Some days, one of them flinches at a comment online, or gets a text they wish they could answer. The fans replay messy details, guessing motives, picking sides. Was it ever love? Did they ever have a chance? Is heartbreak inevitable when two people mistake fantasy for a plan? Not every question gets an answer, and not every wrong turn can be traced back to one villain. Enough toxic fairy tales play out in everyday life. Maybe it's the courage to choose yourself that makes all the difference. Still, I bet you're wondering how anyone moves forward with cameras off and the headlines gone. After so much chaos, life starts feeling smaller, but more livable. Debbie lets herself say yes to things she shelved for years: road trips, game nights, even a cooking class where nobody cares about ratings or drama. Her smile creeps back, fitting awkwardly at first, but growing more real every week. Meanwhile, in the background, Mido's story flickers like a radio station you almost catch, sometimes crystal, mostly static. Fans keep tabs, wondering if he'll resurface with a new partner or a surprise gig, or if LA will eat him alive before the credits roll. But no matter how this saga stretches, the most honest twist is that both walk away changed. Debbie gave up believing in imported saviors, choosing instead to trust her own gut. Mido learned, maybe too late, that you don't find happiness by using people as set pieces. Real connection takes honesty, not just ambition, something that can't be scripted or staged, even for reality TV. Now, the credits threaten to roll, but you know these shows never leave us with a neat bow. The next twist might be a text from someone new for Debbie, a DM from an old friend that doesn't start with "so sorry." Maybe it's Mido getting a break in a city that's never heard of his last name, or realizing that the chase isn't worth as much without someone rooting for you off camera. For viewers, the urge to judge gets replaced by curiosity. Will Debbie set stronger boundaries with the next sweetheart who comes her way? Could Mido ever admit he missed something bigger than fame? Maybe the real lesson is that every happy ending gets paid for in hard lessons and a little bit of regret, but none of that makes the journey less honest. One thing's clear: no matter how wild the ride, the heartbreak, the rumors, and the late-night meltdowns, fans are already hungry for the next chapter. Which couple will melt down spectacularly next? Whose love bomb turned into a ticking time bomb, and who might actually pull off a happy ending where both people win? Watch carefully, because every episode proves heartbreak might be common, but the way we survive it is always unique. If you think things have calmed down, think again. Up next, there's another disaster brewing, another sweet talker with a secret, and a whole new set of cracks waiting to show up in someone else's Instagram story. Stay close, because the cycle never sleeps, and in this universe, closure is only ever temporary.